In 2017, a Minnesota state court judge named James Cannon sat in his doctor's office and looked at his routine lab results. Cannon had spent his career in institutions that valued evidence and the careful reading of documents. So when he scanned the page, he noticed an anomaly. There were two numbers side by side, both measuring his kidney function. One was labeled African American, scoring a 37. The other was labeled, if not African American, scoring a 31. Both numbers were dangerously low. A normal score is above 60, but the African American number was higher, meaning that on paper, his kidneys appeared slightly healthier than the alternative calculation. When Cannon asked why his race dictated a different result, his doctor offered a biological explanation. Black people have more muscle mass. His doctor told him not to worry. He told Cannon, a man who had never been particularly muscular, to simply exercise more. Cannon accepted the explanation and let the issue go. Under the surface, without the urgent specialist intervention the lower number would have demanded, his organs continued to quietly, steadily fail. This calculation was a standardized protocol. The assumption about muscle mass was a line of code embedded in the laboratory software of virtually every hospital in America for over 2 decades. To understand how this happened, we have to look at what that lab report was actually measuring. Your kidneys filter waste from your blood. Doctors assess this filtration using a metric called the estimated glomerular filtration rate, or eGFR. Because they cannot measure this rate directly in a standard clinic, they calculate an estimate using your age, your sex, and the level of creatinine in your blood. Creatinine is a chemical waste product generated by muscle metabolism. The eGFR is one of the most consequential numbers in medicine. It dictates everything downstream in a patient's care. It determines what dosage of chemotherapy you can survive. It dictates when you need a nephrologist. Most importantly, it determines exactly when you become eligible to be placed on the National Kidney Transplant waiting list. This gauge shows how clinical rules operate in practice. In many hospital systems, a hard line is drawn at an eGFR of 20. If your score is a 21, you wait. The moment your score drops below that red line to a 19, an absolute clinical threshold is crossed, and you are referred for a transplant. From 1999 until 2021, if the patient was Black, the algorithm applied a racial multiplier to the result. It multiplied their final score by up to 16. This specific multiplier mathematically guaranteed that Black patients had to become significantly sicker, closer to complete organ failure, than white patients, just to access the exact same medical intervention. The medical justification for this multiplier rested on a single biological claim. The designers of the algorithm assumed that Black people naturally possessed more muscle mass, which would naturally place more creatinine into their bloodstream. Therefore, a higher creatinine reading didn't indicate failing kidneys, it just indicated a muscular patient. This diagram illustrates the evidentiary foundation of that claim. The sweeping biological assumption applied to millions of Americans was derived from 3 small, disjointed studies. There is a fatal scientific flaw here. Muscle mass cannot be accurately measured on a living human being. It can only be weighed on a cadaver. These researchers were entirely inferring their conclusions based on proxy data. When the equation was updated in 2009 to the new national standard, the CKD-EPI formula, the researchers acknowledged that the muscle mass theory lacked concrete evidence. They baked the race correction into the algorithm anyway. They kept the multiplier because it improved the statistical accuracy of the formula across their specific population-level dataset. They optimized for statistical cleanliness on a spreadsheet. In the process, they removed the clinical urgency for the individual Black patient sitting across from a doctor, effectively erasing their physical decline from the medical record. The effort to dismantle this formula did not originate with senior hospital administrators or the leadership of medical societies. It started in 2017 with medical students. Students at Beth Israel Deaconess in Boston, then Zuckerberg San Francisco General, and the University of Washington began auditing the evidence and shaming their respective hospitals into dropping the multiplier locally. When these researchers and students brought their evidence to the broader nephrology community to demand a change to the national standard, they met a wall of institutional resistance. According to attendees at these debates, medical leaders defending the race-adjusted formula called the protesting students woke. They told the advocates that their challenges to the equation were unscientific. While this debate dragged on in conference rooms, the algorithm continued to operate in the real world. Bernardea Johnson was the superintendent of Minneapolis Public Schools. She was highly educated, fully insured, and possessed resources that many patients navigating kidney disease do not. Yet the eGFR correction still managed to catch her. Johnson eventually received a transplant, but she later reflected on the lack of urgency in her initial care. How can there be urgency when it looked like your kidneys were functioning better than they were because of this algorithm they use? The medical establishment defended a formula based on proxy measurements of 60 hospital workers from the 1980s by labeling its critics unscientific, all while the code they protected was actively harming the patients directly in front of them. The pressure eventually broke the inertia. In late 2021, a joint task force recommended the immediate removal of race from the eGFR calculation. By 2024, the race-based formula was explicitly prohibited for transplant purposes nationwide. The consequences were immediate. Watch this counter. Between January 2023 and mid-March 2024, hospitals audited their lists. Exactly 14,300 Black kidney candidates had their wait times recalibrated. And from that corrected list, over 2,800 people immediately received the kidney transplants they were historically owed. These are not abstract data points. They are thousands of human lives saved, simply by deleting a single line of prejudiced code. The National Kidney Foundation described the removal of race from eGFR as a model for other specialties. Currently, researchers are identifying dozens of other medical algorithms that still use race as a biological variable. These tools exist today in cardiology, they are used in pulmonology, in obstetrics, and in urology. Like the eGFR multiplier, they assume race is a biological constant that justifies different clinical thresholds for different groups of people. In Medical Apartheid, Harriet Washington traces the assumption of inherent biological difference back to antebellum medicine, where myths about higher pain tolerance and different organ function were used to justify disparate treatment. These beliefs were never fully excised. They evolved. By the 1970s and 80s, the same logic reappeared as a race correction in the eGFR formula, transforming a social construct into a mathematical constant. Medical researchers are now calling for a mandatory systemic audit of every clinical algorithm in American medicine. Voluntary reviews are incapable of rooting out embedded structural racism. Every formula must be examined to determine if it is measuring biology or simply measuring the effects of racism and labeling it biology. Back in Minneapolis, James Cannon is still navigating the medical system. Despite the eGFR correction, his kidneys are still failing. His story is not a neat redemption arc. It is a ledger, and the debt to him has not been paid. Fixing one algorithm does not fix the system. As long as the foundation of these tools remains unexamined, modern medicine is still creating biological disparities and calling it science.